Chapter 16. Gabe missed his redhead. It hadn't even been 3 days, and he already felt the loss of her bright light. He'd gotten used to seeing her, bright hair tucked under a wool cap, on a regular basis, sometimes even when he'd get home after a long day. He didn't realize how much he looked forward to those impromptu moments together. In only a short time, she'd dug her way into his life and his heart completely. He finished feeding Rowdy and Dexter, the latter who nudged him with his nose and made him laugh. Gabe scratched his forelock, knowing that's what the Mustang wanted. Dexter had been an auction find, a 3-strike horse who was slated for slaughter because he'd been returned to auction the maximum number of times. The horse was simply too stubborn for his previous owners. Gabe had taken to him immediately, seeing something in his eyes, and had dedicated himself to learning positive reinforcement training. Once he found out how Dexter communicated and what he needed, their partnership had grown exponentially. This horse had taught him patience and to always look for another way if he hit a wall, rather than get frustrated. Gabe looked over at Fortune, Imogen's new project. This horse was a real challenge, even for someone with his experience. He'd learned to intimidate with his size when confronted. More, he had a history of escaping his paddocks when bored. Mustangs needed a high fence, at least 5 feet tall, so he was prepared for an athletic horse. Still, when Fortune came here, Gabe took the initiative to add electric to the top as an added deterrent. The sound ticking away was enough for most horses to avoid, but if he accidentally brushed it and got zapped, it was a lesson he learned once and hopefully wouldn't need again. The current wasn't strong enough to hurt, just shock, and so far it seemed to do its job. Fortune still remained separate from the other horses, with only the smaller paddock having the high fencing. Gabe decided that when Imogen returned and Anita left, hopefully soon, he'd integrate the herd. The thoroughbred needed friends, and had to learn to be a horse again before they could make any real progress. Gabe turned off the electric and opened the gate to Fortune's field, using the wheelbarrow to block the narrow entrance. Keeping an eye on the unpredictable horse, he unclipped his hay net and went back to the front to fill it with a bale of hay. He was deep in concentration and taken by surprise when his front door slammed, echoing across the property. The Mustangs didn't do more than startle, but Fortune reared, screamed, and ran towards the gate, straight for Gabe. This horse would barrel through him, Gabe knew. It wasn't even a question. Fortune was terrified, and he wasn't thinking, only reacting. Gabe could do one of 2 things: dodge out of the way and let the horse escape, or risk it and try to make himself louder and bigger so Fortune would dodge and turn in the other direction to the far end of the paddock. From the corner of his eye, he spied the flag they kept for safety. Convenient. In a split second, he grabbed it, whipped around to face the galloping horse, and blocked him with the flag, swinging it wildly in front of him and shouting. For a second, he thought he'd chosen wrong. Only a stride away from him, the horse stopped on a dime, spun, kicked out, and ran the other direction. The hooves narrowly missed Gabe's head, and he didn't move or breathe until there was space between them. With a racing heart and anger fueling him, he carefully turned toward the source of the loud sound and pointed. "You, stay right there, Lopez." He needed to calm down before he said or did something he'd regret. Focusing on his breathing, he moved the wheelbarrow, closed the gate, and reset the electric. Safely on the other side of the fence, he checked on Fortune. The horse was still running, his coat now slick with sweat and white foam, his tail in the air. The horse was a runner, and he wanted to make sure Fortune calmed down before turning his attention to the woman. "Whoa, boy, whoa, Fortune. It's okay, it's all over. I promise." Gabe spoke low and calmly, trying to steady his own racing heart, knowing that the sensitive horse would feed off his energy. After several minutes, the horse slowed his gallop and stood, facing him, eyes wide and nose flared with the exertion. Finally, he relaxed enough to pick for grass. Gabe let out a long exhale. He'd have to brush his coat out before he got a chill. One of the belly straps had broken free and the spook and hung, dragging along the ground. He'd have to fix that soon. But first, he had to speak to his guest. Gabe rubbed a hand over his face. Anita stood on the porch, an arm wrapped around the column, watching. If she felt badly, she didn't show it on her face. She waited silently for him to meet her. He climbed the stairs, his legs dragging slowly with weakness as the adrenaline faded. You can't slam the door or make sudden noises, Lopez. This is at least the second time. Imogen told me what happened with her. Learn from your mistakes. Lopez looked over at the horse. I'm sorry. I was just coming out to see if you wanted breakfast. The door slipped. Gabe raised an eyebrow. Lopez had started doing small things around the house in return for staying, including the laundry and some basic cooking. While he appreciated the effort, he missed having the chores as part of his meditative routine. Housework relaxed him. He was man enough to admit it. More than that, though, she'd shown no signs of leaving. You need to be more careful. Gabe pointed to Fortune. This horse is a flight risk and a danger to himself and others. I didn't realize. Anita looked at the horse and bit her bottom lip. Gabe hated to nag, but this was important. It was lucky that neither of us got hurt. This could have been really bad, Lopez. I'm sorry, really. I'm not familiar with horses. Yeah, you've been here over a week and never approached them. You scared, Lopez? Anita scowled. I'm not afraid. I just don't know anything about them. Gabe arched a dark eyebrow. Do you want to? I can introduce you to mine. She was shaking her head before he finished the offer. Nope, I'm good. He laughed. Chicken? I'm not a chicken. Anita was insulted. Who had your 6 more times than you could count? She pointed to herself. Sure. That's why it's really funny that you're scared of a horse. He shook his head ruefully. You mean the extremely large animal that almost killed you? Anita frowned. I really am sorry. I know you are, Gabe admitted. But it can't happen again. It's a safety issue. Roger that. Gabe walked into the house, his chores finally complete. Taking off his jacket and boots, he placed them neatly by the door. He loved an orderly house. It felt odd for his friend to walk in and start plating breakfast in his kitchen. When did she get so comfortable here? He washed his hands, then grabbed a cup of coffee. They hadn't spoken about her situation since she'd arrived. At first, he was careful not to overstep. He didn't want to trigger her. But she'd been here for over a week and showed no indication she was leaving. Yesterday, he'd tried to do laundry, but her things were in the wash. It was time to put their cards on the table. Listen, we need to talk. Anita stopped plating the eggs and set the frying pan on the counter to give him her full attention. He continued when she didn't speak. I don't want to seem uncaring, but what are your plans to leave? I've got a lot going on myself and honestly need to get back to my regular routine. I can't afford to have any distractions right now. You saw what just happened. I said I was sorry. It won't happen again. Gabe nodded. I understand and appreciate that, honestly. But it's more than that. Lopez, Anita, you can't just stay here until you leave for your next tour. You have to go home and face the situation. She swallowed hard and averted her eyes. He's a police officer. If I file a report for assault, they're going to close ranks and bury it. She shook her head. Honestly, there is nowhere I can go in the U.S. that he can't find me. He has connections. He won't let me go easily. Gabe sighed, running a hand through his hair in frustration. I'm surprised he hasn't shown up here, honestly. But that's a good thing, he added when Lopez looked like she was going to bolt. Do you have any hospital reports or evidence that he assaulted you? Yes, in a security deposit box. I wanted to keep it offline. Records are too easy to hack. Gabe agreed. That was the smart move. But if her ex-boyfriend got to her first, the deposit box would go quietly into the night and never be opened. He was worried that if he knew of her leverage, he'd escalate the situation. Bullies didn't like to be called out on their actions. Give me the details. Hopefully we won't need them, but if anything happens, I'll file an inquiry myself and use it to back your statement up. Okay, I'll do that after breakfast. She paused and finished plating the now cold eggs. You've been more than welcoming. I know you didn't sign up for this, and I'm putting a kink in your relationship. I'm sure your friend isn't happy I'm here. I don't want to cause problems. She's my girlfriend, not just a friend. And I know, Lopez. I know. I'll help you with what I can, but you can't just hide here. That isn't helping anything." "You're right," Anita agreed. It wasn't like her to rabbit and run. She had hidden away long enough. It was time to face her problems, however that ended up. "I'll leave this weekend. I've got to make some calls and set some things in place back in Boston." Relieved, Gabe nodded, digging into the watery scrambled eggs. He couldn't wait to have his kitchen back to himself.